Hey, Plumber Tom here. If you're studying from the Mathematics for Plumbers and Pipefitters book, you've come to the right place. I'm glad to help you with your understanding. Don't forget to check in the description below this video for access to books and resources that will help you with your understanding. There are online courses and other things that you can take that will help you prepare for a state test. When you purchase from those links, you're helping me to be able to create more great content. Thanks for watching. Hello, welcome to this presentation of Mathematics for Plumbers and Pipefitters. My name is Thomas, and in this presentation we're looking at Unit 22, which is 40-degree offsets with a Y fitting. Now for starters, we're going to be looking at cast iron fittings or diagrams of cast iron fittings. And the book kind of brings up the question of why do we even use cast iron pipe when plastics are available? Both are approved by code, but when do you use one and when do you use the other? Well, this points out particularly that cast iron fittings are used in hazardous usage areas like warehouses, factories, seagoing vessels, high-rise buildings, anywhere that heavy vibration and moving machinery are likely to be present. So, long story short, it's more durable, it's strong, it is brittle. I mean, we have to watch out for that. But it's tough, and it can hold up against vibration better than plastics will. Now, as I've mentioned before, this book teaches us progressively. We kind of go step by step through these units, and in the past we've looked at offsets and using a 45-degree triangle. We've also examined how to subtract for fitting allowances for different types of pipe using the data tables that are in the back, since we don't actually have fittings in front of us on the table to measure from. And in this unit we're going to continue along that line of thinking, only this time rather than using 90s, 45s or other elbows, we're going to be examining these sort of offsets with a Y in place. That's the 45-degree offset with Y fitting that we discuss in the title of this unit. Basically just taking out one of the 45-degree fittings and putting a Y in its place. And the important thing here is that it's going to affect the fitting allowances. A Y is not the same as a 45 in shape or in its fitting allowances. So we'll be looking at subtracting for the Y on different sides of the Y with different fitting allowance measurements associated to that fitting. As we examine this diagram at the bottom of the page, on the first page of the unit, we're going to see a 90 starting on the bottom right corner is coming horizontally across. Then it's going to offset up, coming from that Y on a 45-degree angle. It comes up a little ways. And then we have a 45-degree fitting that straightens that out, comes up vertical, and then we see another fitting, a 90-degree fitting on the top. You can see the Y and the 45 fittings have created a 90-degree turn, but they've kind of spread that out, and that's useful for flow. Especially in drainage, we see that necessity of creating a longer sweep so that we have better flow through the fittings in the drainage system. As we continue in Unit 22, we find another diagram of a Y fitting here. As we examine this, you can see that there are some differences in the centers or the fitting allowances that we would take off. And there's a whole paragraph explaining this, but in short, if you look at this diagram, there is C, that's from the top of the fitting to the center of where those Y branches come together. It's the same as C, that's the branch coming off to the right on a 45-degree angle. Those centers are going to be the same. But if we look at the very bottom of the fitting, you have from the bottom to that same point where those two pipe branches intersect is actually a shorter distance, right? So we can't assume that just because there's three different connections to this, that our center is going to be the same. When we're calculating and when we're subtracting for fitting allowances, we have to look at which part of that fitting are we dealing with, and therefore which fitting allowance are we going to deduct. Now they give us data table 8. Let's go there. Here we have data table 8 for a regular 45-degree Y. These are for threaded copper and PVC versions of that fitting. Let me just point out that these are not drainage fittings. And I don't know when you'd ever use a not drainage fitting Y, because really Ys are just mainly used for drainage, but here we have them. And I point that out because at the bottom of the table, we'll look at that in a minute, there are drainage Ys with slightly different measurements. But let's look at this one, because this part of data table 8 is what we're going to use for all of Unit 22. We're not dealing with drainage wise, we're dealing with regular wise. So let's look at the measurements here. We have sizes on the left side from 1 1/4 up to 4 inch. If we look at the threaded Y, you can see that the measurement C is the center to face measurement. So this is the long run and branch section. And they go from the face of the fitting to that center point where we've got the center line of the fitting and where that meets the center line of the branch. That's going to be our main center point there. Now if you look at D on the threaded fitting, this is where we have the center to face measurement is the short run up to that same point where we have our center line of the fitting where it meets the center line of the branch, but we're measuring up from the bottom to that center point, so a little bit shorter. We see those measurements on the table below, and as with other fittings that we've dealt with on threaded, they're going to have the thread in measurement. That's, say, like 1/2 inch is how far the pipe goes into the fitting for 1.5 inch nominal pipe size. That covers our threaded pipe. Look at the copper. They simplify this again for copper. We have the measurement H is going to go from the shoulder, that's where the pipe stops inside of the fitting, to that center point. We've got the center line of the Y where it meets the center line of the branch, and that's H. And then we also have I. Now that's the shorter section from the shoulder of that bottom part, the short end, into that center point, as with the other ones. Same thing with PVC. H is going to represent the longer portion from the shoulder to face. And those are our actual fitting allowances, right? On copper and PVC, we can just subtract H or I. We don't have to do any extra with how far the pipe goes into the fitting, as with the threaded. But again, H is going to be to that center point, and then I coming into the bottom of that PVC. Y, we're going to have that shorter measurement, but that is the fitting allowance for the PVC. Here we have the bottom half of data table 8. These are Ys that are specifically for drainage. We will not be using them in Unit 22, but these are the measurements we'll use in Unit 23. Notice they're a little bit different. As we look at that Y on the left side, we have an overall measurement, that's A, from face to face, straight through that fitting. And then we have C is measurement from the upper face down to the center point. Now, there's going to be times when we need a measurement for the bottom, so you can say the bottom face to that center point. We're going to have to subtract for that. A minus C would give us that difference. And then they just give us D, that's the face of the Y, where it branches off to that center line point that we have been referring to. All right, now that we've had a look at the data table in the back and we understand the difference between a Y and the fitting allowances for a Y and a 45 or another elbow fitting, let's look at our sample problem. The first one that we have here says solve for center to center and end to end lengths for the threaded pipes J, K, L, and M. Now we have 4 different measurements we're going for. First we'll find the center to center, then the end to end. It's reminding us to use data table 5 and data table 8 for those fitting allowances. 5 because we're still dealing with elbows throughout this diagram, right? And we also have 8. As we look over this diagram, we see a number of overall measurements. We can see some of the different fittings that are laid out. There's a branch that comes off on a 45-degree angle from the Y. There's a 45 elbow that straightens that out. And we split these pipes and they're going to start running parallel, and then they offset at the end with 90s. So where is J? J is the pipe length from the 90 to the Y at the very bottom, and it's given to us as 13 inches. Then we have K. K runs from the center of the Y up to the center of the 90 straight ahead as we continue from the bottom where it starts. L is going to be our diagonal. It's the section from the Y to the 45, and it's the diagonal of a triangle. And M is going to be that section between the 45-degree fitting and the 90, and we're going to be figuring for that short piece there. Please note that this is 1.5 inch threaded pipe, and let's do a little bit of math here to figure out our center to center while we're on this page. First of all, as I mentioned, center to center for J is 13 inches. Now as we look at for K, we're going to take the overall. On the right side it says 56 inches, but we know at the bottom we can subtract that 13 from the center of the 90 to the center of the Y. So 56 minus 13 is going to be 43. We have 43 for center to center on K. Now what about L? L is the diagonal of a 45-degree triangle. So if we look up at the top there, we see a measurement center to center, 27 inches. That is the same as the side of one of those triangles, the shorter side. So we can take 27 and multiply that by 1.414, and we will get 38.178, or 38 and 3/16. Finally, how are we going to get M? Look over on the left side. We have the overall of 56. We could subtract what we know at the bottom is 13 inches. We got 43. We can also subtract 27. As we look at this triangle, if our offset is 27, then the measurement from the center of that Y going vertical or straight up to the center of where that 45 will be is also 27. Remember, those two sides of the triangle are the same. So 56 minus 13 minus 27. Those are those two sections we can figure. That's going to leave us with M, which is 16 inches. So now we have our center to center measurements. J is 13, K is 43, and L is 38 3/16. M is 16 inches. From that, we're going to be subtracting our fitting allowances from the data tables in the back. Let's start with our J here. We know that center to center is 13. We go to the back data table 5 for a 90. We're looking for the threaded elbow, 1.5 inch. We're going to find that A, that's the face to center measurement for the 90-degree elbow, is 1 15/16, and B is 1/2 of an inch. Again, that's how far the pipe threads into the fitting. Flip over to data table 8 and we'll find for a 45-degree threaded Y, that is 1.5 inch pipe. D is 1 15/16 and B is 1/2 of an inch. Coincidentally, those are the same. Let's jump down here then and do our math. End to end equals 13 minus 1 15/16 plus 1 15/16 minus 2 times 1/2. We consolidate all of that and we're going to end up with end to end equals 13 minus 2 7/8. Our end to end measurement is then going to be 10 1/8 for J. Moving on to K, we have a vertical overall of 56. 56 minus 13 is 43. That's what we figured before on our center to center measurements. Going back to the back of the book, we have data table 8 giving us the Y for a 1.5 inch Y. On the outcoming end, we're using that C measurement. We have 3 9/16. We're also going to subtract off B, which is 1/2 of an inch. We go over to data table 5 to look at the 90, and once again we have 1 15/16 is the face to center measurement, and we're going to subtract off 1/2 of an inch. Let's go to our end to end calculation then. We have 43 minus, in brackets, 3 9/16 plus 1 15/16 minus 2 times 1/2. As we crunch that and consolidate all of those numbers, we get end to end equals 43 minus 4.5, and the end to end measurement will then be 38 1/2. Let's calculate the end to end for L. We've already figured our center to center by taking 27 and multiplying that by 1.414. They give us 38.178, or 38 3/16. Then we go to data table 8 for our threaded Y. This time we're coming out the left side of that Y, and we're going to get our fitting allowance is C, which is 3 9/16. We're also going to subtract off the pipe coming into the fitting, so that's B, 1/2 inch. Then we go over to data table 5. We have a 45-degree elbow. A is 1 7/16, and B is 1/2 of an inch. Let's run the numbers. End to end equals 38 3/16 minus, in brackets, 3 9/16 plus 1 7/16 minus 2 times 1/2. So we crunch all of those together. We're going to get end to end equals 38 and 3/16 minus 4, which is going to leave us with end to end equals 34 and 3/16. And last, our end to end for the measurement M on our sample problem 1. If you remember, our center to center measurement was 56 minus 13 plus 27. We're subtracting off the things we knew to get the piece that we didn't know, and we came to center to center equals 16 inches. Jumping back to data table 5, that's all we need for this one because we're dealing with a 45-degree elbow and a 90-degree elbow. The 45-degree elbow, fitting allowance from face to center, 1 and 7/16, and we're going to subtract off a half for the pipe. For the 90, we have 1 and 15/16. We'll subtract off a half for the pipe. What we're going to end up here with is end to end equals 16 minus, in the brackets, 1 and 7/16 plus 1 and 15/16 minus 2 times 1/2. Consolidate all of that. We're going to get end to end equals 16 minus 2 and 3/8. Finally, we'll have end to end equals 13 and 5/8. Great job, way to stick with me. We got through sample problem 1. If you missed any of those steps or didn't understand, please go back and review. And before you get into your assignments, I would encourage you to make sure that you know step by step how this math works. Double check yourself on the sample problems because everything is spelled out here in front of you. And then you can dig into your exercise problems. But before you do, we have in this unit another sample problem. Let's do sample problem 2 together. Here we have it. Take a good look at the diagram. Sample problem 2, it lays out exactly like the last diagram we looked at, but notice the difference. We are now dealing with PVC fittings, still 1.5 inch pipe. But here we go with these PVC fittings. Let's look for center to center measurements for J, K, L, and M. And then we'll go back through, subtract our fitting allowances for each of those so that we have our end to end measurements. Starting with J. J is given to us, center to center is 20. Let's move on to K. We have an overall of 75 inches. We can subtract off J. 75 minus 20 is 55 inches. K is 55 inches. Let's go over to L. Looking at the very top here, we know what our offset is. Between those two parallel pipes, we have 29 inches. We can take that offset, 29, multiply that by 1.414, and we're going to get 41.006. You know what? That's close enough. Let's call it 41 inches, shall we? L is 41, center to center. And M, we are going to do as we did before, subtract what we know to get what we don't know. We have an overall of 75. We subtract 20. We also subtract 29. That leaves us with a total of 26. M equals 26. That's our center to center. Now I need to take a little time out here and point out something that I missed as I was describing this sample problem. I said it's all 1.5 inch, but check this out. J and K are actually 2-inch pipes. So that straight pipe that's going through with the Y, 2-inch pipe, but it has a 1.5 inch branch. Keep that in mind as we are finding fitting allowances, that the pipe is reduced where it branches off to the left going to L and M. Okay, let's look at J. J center to center is given as 20. We go to data table 5 and look up a 90, PVC 90. The fitting allowance for that is 2 and 5/16. Flipping over to data table 9, if we have a reducing Y, then we have a 2 1/2 inch PVC Y. We go to data table 9, we have a reducing Y, so a 2 1/2 inch Y. Let's find the fitting allowance. This is I, this shorter section at the bottom of the Y, 1 and 1/16. So let's run it. End to end equals 20 minus, in parentheses, 2 and 5/16 plus 1 and 1/16. That's going to give us end to end equals 20 minus 3 and 3/8. Finally, we have end to end equals 16 and 5/8. We've got K up on the screen here. Let's go for it. Center to center, as we looked at, was 75 minus 20. That gave us 55 inches. We go to data table 9, look up our PVC Y. Now we're looking at the top part of that Y, Coming out of there, our fitting allowance is 3 5/16. Flipping back to data table 5 for our 90, a PVC 90 fitting allowance, 2 5/16. So let's run the numbers. End to end equals 55 minus, in parentheses, 3 5/16 plus 2 5/16. We're going to put those together. End to end equals 55 minus 5 5/8. That's going to leave us with end to end equals 49 3/8. Way to crunch it. Let's go to pipe L. We're looking for end to end measurement. If you remember, we solved this by multiplying 29 by 1.414 and we got 41.006. So close to 41, we're going to run with 41. 41 is our center to center. We go back to data table 5, find the PVC elbow, 45 degree elbow, and the fitting allowance for that is 1 1/8 of an inch. Flipping over to data table 9, we're using that reducing Y, and once again our fitting allowance this time coming off the left side of that is 3 7/16. We run the numbers. End to end equals 41 minus, in parentheses, 1 1/8 plus 3 7/16. We consolidate what's in the parentheses and we end up with end to end equals 41 minus 4 9/16. This gives us a total end to end measurement of 36 7/16 of an inch. And last, let's solve for pipe M. We had to subtract what we know to get what we don't know. We took 75, subtracted 20 and 29 to get center to center equals 26 for our pipe M. We go to the back and we're going to use data table 5 on both of these because we have a 90 and we have a 45. Let's look at the 45. Fitting allowance for a 45 is 1 1/8 of an inch. Fitting allowance for a 90 is 1 3/4 of an inch. Those are for our 1 1/2 inch PVC fittings. Let's run the numbers. End to end equals 26 minus, in parentheses, 1 1/8 plus 1 3/4. Put those together and we get end to end equals 26 minus 2 7/8. Finally, we have end to end equals 23 1/8. Nicely done. Are you seeing the patterns? We go through the same patterns and the same process to find our calculations, finding our center to centers, going to the end to end every time we do these. Only difference in this exercise is we've got a branch, we threw in some Y's, but we've got this, right? So it's time for you to do your exercises. There are 6 exercise problems listed at the end of this unit. Look at the diagram. Use the numbers on the table to fill in the blanks on the diagram. You'll have your start, your overall, and your offset. You plug those numbers in and you watch for the pipe size and type on that table. Then you crunch your numbers. You've got this. So I'm going to give you time to do that, and I'll see you in the next unit.